The heads of Brazil, China, India and South Africa, as well as Russia's top diplomat, will gather between the 22nd and the 24th of August. South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor says the summit will provide an opportunity to amplify the voices of the African continent as well as the global South. But what exactly do we need to know about BRICS, especially its history and where it is headed? Development economist and Frontline Group CEO is Dr. Jason Musyoka. He joins us now to find some answers to these questions. Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this morning. Let's start with exactly that, the history of BRICS.
So BRICS is an emergence of really a counter, body or enterprise from the world powers that were dominant from post-World War II, the 1945 onwards. And essentially, what you begin to see that the key inception of it was a study that was done by an economist from the Goldman Sachs in 2001, Jim O'Neill, and he made an assessment of the fact that at the time, in 2001, you had ongoing agglomeration of several Western powers. You had the G5s and the G7. Those two were particularly dominant at the time as key decision makers as far as international monetary policy is concerned. But in 2001, Jim O'Neill recognized some research that they did that China, Brazil, Russia, and certainly India, they were actually among the fastest growing economies, superseding even some of the so-called G7 economies at the time. And that research paper really argued that these countries needed to be incorporated into the G7. As a matter of fact, Jim O'Neill argued that we needed to have a G10 that would include these countries. But fast forward to 2006, and I think that very interestingly, that was the theoretical background to it. 2006, Russia and China began to move towards actualizing a south-to-south enterprise, and that was really the very first informal meeting in a UN General Assembly in 2006. And then 2009, there was a second one. South Africa was admitted in 2010 and then attended the third summit in 2011 as the very first one that South Africa attended. So in summary, it was really a theoretical assessment of the fact that these economies were very consequential and yet they were being excluded from decision-making powers, particularly from the G7 countries.
Is it safe to say that BRICS presents a quest for a new world order? If it is, what are some of the opportunities as well as threats that exist?
So one will have to go back to a long history of how the world's empires have emerged and fallen. And historically, and in economic history particularly, you clearly see that empires or hegemonies last for approximately, and world orders last for approximately 40 years, which is essentially what we refer to as a generation. And go back to the fall of the British Empire from First World War I, that they could not really recover from that. And then the U.S. rises to power in 1945. And again, another 40 years, and then you have a major crisis going on around the world in the 1990s, the fall of the Soviet Union and so on. And then another 40 years between then and now, and you can clearly see the emergence of China. So there's that 40 window kind of segmentation of global economies. And to answer your question directly, very clearly, BRICS is an alternative to Western hegemony. And as much as the U.S. is the leading hegemony, but the U.S. leads alongside its fellow Western powers, the G7s and others, including the Eurozone, for example. And so China, and being the leader now, the global South, has really been trying to marshal cooperation, trade cooperation, finance cooperation, development cooperation among South-South countries and economies. And it's a clear challenge, because if you look at the IMF, the World Bank, when you look at the BRICS institutions, the New Development Bank, and there is also the contingency fund that they have set aside, which is another organ of BRICS, for assisting countries which suffer a liquidity crunch, and this is global South countries. That's an alternative to the IMF, while the New Development Bank is an alternative to the World Bank. So it is, by all measures and definitions, emerging new world order.
So when you take a look at the dynamics that already exist, especially in terms of opportunities and threats, for instance, when you take a look at South Africa, Brazil, the imports of chicken and how some sectors of the society are not entirely happy about that. China, India, for instance, is each country negotiating in the benefit of its own people, and how do you then get not necessarily groupthink, but a way forward in terms of how each country benefits and not how one benefits more than the other?
So I think one also needs to then look at the fact that trade has become one of the essential tools for development. And some countries have been, the models that Global South has been using, China in particular, there's a whole process of decoupling that China started in 2005, decoupling from the U.S. and using import substitution to discourage imports from the U.S. particularly and to grow home industries. Those policies have not necessarily been transformed to suit Global South countries. And I think there is really the teething issues there to ensure that the policies that are applied to these other countries that are beyond or the Global North are not the same ones applied to Global South. But I think there is progress in that and clear appreciation of the fact that Global South trade is much more even. It's not as uneven as a Global North and South. So I think there is attraction to that. And as a matter of fact, the upcoming summit, one of the key issues under discussion is really going to be trade. South Africa is a small player. It contributes approximately 1.5% to the population of the entire BRICS. So South Africa will have to negotiate much more innovatively, perhaps more than the other larger economies within BRICS. But South Africa also has an advantage in that there is an opportunity for exports, particularly of minerals within BRICS, and to expand our services export to those countries.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your time this morning. Development economist and Frontline Group CEO, Dr. Jason Musyoka.